Leadership is taking people on a journey where there's a vision, guidance and purpose.
Good leaders lead with the heart as well as the head.
Leadership means doing the right thing for the right reason, no matter how difficult it might be.
You're listening to Leadership Unwrapped, a podcast where you will hear from people who are living leadership every day.
Our guest today is Dr. Berni Moreno. With a background in teaching, Berni has since completed a PhD in teacher perceptions of new principals in Melbourne. Dr. Moreno is an expert on principal integration in schools upon appointment to principalship. Berni's interests also span school leadership at all levels and its impact on school effectiveness and improvement, leadership identification, development and retention in schools. Berni, you recently joined us for a webinar and you kindly agreed to come and chat to us again today, so thank you so much and we're really looking forward to it.
Absolutely, and hello to both of you, Patricia and Neve. Thanks for having me.
So Berni, do you want to tell us a little bit about your journey into academia?
I think if we talk about journey, it's a bit like Alice in Wonderland. I didn't know where I was going. I mean, I ended up in academia, or I think I am in academia. It's still early days for me, but it's been a fascinating one. So I have as you said, a teaching background in teaching and in secondary schooling in music classroom and in language, in Spanish teaching, which is my first language. And in the process of becoming a teacher, I was first of all, I was very much supported by incredible school leadership, by a principal that was very transformational. And when I say that, I mean she was motivating us teachers. She was very good at communicating what the vision of the school was, bringing us all together. And we felt that what we were trying to do as teachers, or I certainly felt it, was very much aligned with what was happening in the school. And it just felt like we were all going in the right direction. And also I was invited through my different expertise and as I was building that to take up middle leadership roles. And so, of course, that was my first step into a middle leadership role that gave me a sense of what it is to be, right in the middle. So you're dealing with your school leadership level, your principal, your vice principals, heads of teaching and learning, but you also have to have a different identity that you have to develop because you're working and trying to support more than anything and build capacity on a team that's relying on you. So in this case, other teachers in languages. Sometimes that middle leadership role had to do with school well-being and student well-being. So it was diverse. I was also involved in the International Baccalaureate. So from an instructional perspective, from curriculum leadership, if you want to call that, I also had that opportunity. And so that was my first experience in that type of role. And then a very particular event took place 12 years after I had started my teaching degree. And this wonderful principal that I've just described left very unexpectedly. And it had a huge impact on me personally, professionally, because I admired her very much. And so one of the things that I did mention when we had the webinar was the importance of the person before we look at the leader. So I admired so much these personal practices and personal qualities that this woman had. So that from a personal perspective. And then professionally, of course, if you want to do well in your job, if you want to develop yourself in your expertise, you also need to find that support. So that was going to be difficult. And I also started noticing how my colleagues collectively as well, it was almost as though someone had died, although she hadn't died. She had just left. And it just got me really thinking about this power, of leadership. And this was in quite a big school. And so I'm thinking, how does it happen? How did this person do that? So that got me interested in school leadership more than anything. I enrolled in a Master of Ed Leadership, which I completed at the University of Melbourne, where I am now. And of course, at the end of that, I had more questions than answers and spoke to the supervisors of that and said, look, I really want to continue. And I'm still intrigued by this relationship between new principals and the impact on teachers.
So did you do
And then,
research on
yeah.
that area within your master's?
I
as well?
did. Well, the master's was coursework, was not research.
Right, okay.
So my master's included, learning about school improvement and effectiveness, curriculum leadership, looking at managing the school organization, leading the school organization, and of course research methods, which was something I was very interested in. And also I needed that training to be able to complete my thesis. Yeah. And then once I completed the thesis, towards the last 2 years, I left the teaching profession. I was very fortunate that I could leave the school and concentrate fully on finishing my thesis. I feel really blessed that I was able to do that. Not everyone can do that. And so I had to ask myself, well, what now? After I've got my degree, I've got my my PhD, what am I going to do now? And I could have gone back to schools. I don't think I wanted to be a principal. The more I studied them in my thesis, the more I realized what an incredible big job. And I thought, these are just amazing people. I didn't think that I wanted that. But I very much enjoyed the research process. And so I thought, I'll give that a go. And I've been very supported and now have a lectureship at the University of Melbourne. And so I'm very happy where I am now. But I am an early career researcher in that sense.
I'm fascinated. I'm fascinated by the personal impact of a leader leaving, because that's the piece we're not talking about. And we do feel... So, I mean, I can relate to what you're saying, because I had an amazing school principal in my school too, who really encouraged me to do what I'm doing now, which I think a lot of leaders don't do that because they think, I don't want to lose this person. But it was amazing that she was generous about that. And I always love her for that. But when she left, it was like a bereavement in the school. And
absolutely,
I don't think we ever got over it, because we were so attached to the safety that she created, the vision that she created, the kindness. And we don't think about what it's like for us going home when we get that news, and what it's like to go in every day, and how low you can get around your work when you know that this person who has kind of made the place you want to work in leaves. So I'm really interested to hear you say that.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things about principal succession that we don't tend to be very good at in education. Succession planning and all that, the business world is far more advanced in that, and they've done it better. And we've certainly, in leadership succession, we've learned a lot from that. But it doesn't necessarily mean that when an outstanding principal like the one you've experienced, Patricia, and I experienced, and maybe Neve you have, and maybe our listeners too can relate to that, it doesn't mean that automatically the person that comes to replace that will not be as good. In fact, there's why should, it doesn't necessarily have to be like that. But what I think we have been missing, and what certainly my PhD research taught me, is that it's not something we are aware of as teachers. We're not aware of this change by the person who's leaving. And more importantly, the person that's coming in, as new principals, we need to be aware of what is the context? What was that relationship like? If you're coming to replace a very much loved principal, then build on that. Mm-hmm. That's great, rather than saying, we're going to forget that. So if something was working in that prior relationship, let's keep that in a way. And the other reason why I think that this emphasis so much on the person before we move on to the leader has got to do with kind of a bit of the research that I'm doing now within that, in relational trust. How do principals build trust? New principals build trust on teachers when they come in, because that's what you want. That's going to give you teacher buy-in. That's what's going to get everyone motivated and building and improving the whole organization. And one of the things that I've looked at is that you can trust the role. Teachers can trust the role of the principal, but the role is pretty much the same. And by that I mean what we expect a principal to do, the behaviours of a principal. They're quite generic. We could sort of see them even at a global level and have some commonalities in different places. But to be able to trust a leader when something unexpected happens, or perhaps when the pandemic, comes. Sometimes the person will come out. The person will step out, and really their qualities will determine that. So often principals who want to build that trust, you really have to be transparent. You have to show who you are, because unless you do that, you're just going to be trusted as the principal rather than the person, who's in that role. And I think there's a lot more work to be done in that area.
I think so too. I think it's super hard to replace someone anyway, because that comparison is going to be happening for a while. So I think you also need patience. I mean, you have to build the trust in others, but you also have to trust in yourself to go more slowly while that's happening. And so you will hear a lot of, but X didn't do it that way, but, we didn't used to do it that way, or should we do it differently? And you just, like you're saying, have to let things settle and maybe go slowly and just be for a while, and to trust that. And that takes a bit of self-talk when you're a bit nervous about taking up that role in the first place, and you're in that compared space.
Absolutely. Trust in any situation, in any personal relationships that we've all experienced, in the relationship between a teacher and a student. It means putting yourself in a vulnerable situation. It's accepting that somebody else is going to provide you with something that's going to help you. If we think about in that sense, trust. So absolutely, it has to be well paced. It has to be slowly, and you have to be able to provide, to show opportunities. There must be opportunities for you to show how you act. Teachers want to see repeatedly how you're behaving. Where's the pattern going? Where's that empathy being shown? They can't just happen every now and then. And teachers, the ghost of the, and this is not a finding from my research, this is from previous research that I've built on, the ghost of the past principal is very much alive, good or bad. We tend to remember both extremes, just like in anything in life, I guess, the very good and the very bad, if one can say that. But even the ones that perhaps didn't have, that middle range that didn't have an impact, we have to allow for that. And as I said, we should build on that. And that's one of the most important things new principals need to do, that, they have to find what is working, because every school will have something that is working, and that's a good place to start, I think.
Yeah, it's like finding your rhythm, isn't it? It's like finding your flow and being open to it and taking time to do it. Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, it's interesting, because if you do look at the two extremes, whether there wasn't a very strong relationship between the principal and the staff, or if there was a very positive relationship, it brings challenges and opportunities either way, doesn't it? Because if there was a very negative relationship, there mightn't be that sense of trust. Yet as a new principal coming in, you would have the opportunity where people would be probably more enthusiastic about change. And on the flip side, if there was that really positive relationship, you've big shoes to fill. So there are high expectations, and, people might be very comfortable in the way that things were done with that individual because of that high trust. But as you said, Bernie, as well as that, you have that positive relationship among the staff to build on. So it's funny in that sense.
Absolutely. And I think it has implications for school boards and school governance, because sometimes we have to think, well, who's appointing these principals? And it's so important that there is a common thread of what the school needs. We talk a lot about in principal succession about the right fit. Sometimes we just like in our personal life, sometimes, you click with someone and or you think it'll work in the context. It's important to get that. It's very important. That doesn't mean to say that, people can't develop into that or develop into that culture. But sometimes you have to be very careful how you do that. What is interesting, just on that topic of developing trust, is what happens in schools that have experienced high principal turnover. So that's a paper that I'm going to give later in the year in September. That's actually really complex, because in schools that, for example, are changing principals every 2 or 3 years as a result of different circumstances, for them, building that trust is very difficult, and it can be very damaging as well in that relationship between teachers and principals. In some studies, we have found that when that happens in those contexts of high principal turnover, in fact, teachers stick together more. That was certainly one of my case studies in my thesis. Their sense of morale was quite low. They were disillusioned. They were very saddened, really. Those were some of the feelings they had about not having a principal that they loved or that they could connect with. But it certainly made them stronger. So their sense of belonging to the school, to their school community, didn't necessarily suffer, but it had other impacts as well.
Yeah, the context is just huge. I mean, culture just plays a massive part here, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
I think it's also really interesting. It's something I haven't looked at that I'd like to look at, but when you are a school leader and you come in to a school where teachers are sticking together, and there are maybe sometimes, in the negative end of the continuum, cliques and factions that control the space, how hard it is it's possible to do great work in that space once you figure out how to get in and to work in different ways in these groups. But it's a really interesting area to think about, the challenge for a leader personally in going into that space and having to work really gently to change that dynamic in a staff room. Have you seen anything like that?
Definitely, and in some of the case studies in my thesis, I had, and I think I showed that in one of the slides, they focused on that visibility. That seemed to be one of the gold keys for all principals in the case studies. They needed to be seen. They were very perceptive, they reflected on themselves as well. So they knew that it wasn't important just for them to go out and be seen and say hello. They were interested in how that was being perceived by others. So the dedicated time, that principle that built in the 20-minute every day to go walking. So they were strategic about the visibility. It wasn't just anywhere. That doesn't mean it was fake because they were being strategic. It meant they were intentional. I'm going to use this visibility, this walking time, this meeting with parents, going into classrooms in a different way. The principals that went into classroom just to be seen and to get to know students made it very clear from the very beginning to teachers that they weren't going in to observe their classes. So he created very early a sense of, I'm not here to judge you. I'm here as the new principal, excited about the learning that's going in the classroom. And they were very faithful to that. So they'd come in, they'd sit at the back, or they'd talk to some students when they were doing activities. They tried to be respectful, that they weren't there interrupting. Not all teachers liked this. Not all teachers thought that it was a good.
How did they take it?
Yeah, no. It wasn't 100% yes, come in. Some teachers felt, comments like, he interrupts when he comes in. Or I remember one teacher said, he comes into my maths class and he says, oh, you're doing math. This is wonderful. I was never good at maths. And so the teacher's like, I don't like that. I'm trying to break students to think that they're either good or not good at maths. Having said that, they understood that was his way of building relationships. And they understood it because this principal explicitly talked about it. So Peter, which is the pseudonym I used for him in my thesis, Peter, when I interviewed him twice as well as the teachers. And he'd say to me, this is what I want to do when I come in. This is what I'm going, this is what I'm doing in my first year. I'm going into classrooms. And I told them in the staff meeting that I was going to do that. So he was verbalizing his thinking all the time, which added to that level of transparency. Many teachers described Peter as, what you see is what you get. Even the ones that said, yeah, he seems a bit informal for this type of school, but this is who he is. They actually valued that much more as well. So I think, being, as you said, being very patient, the visibility, the transparency, they were very aware of change in the same way as I explained in the webinar, that teachers had the inevitable sense of change. They know that with new principle comes change. Just with any type of leadership, really, in our society, we kind of expect that things are going to be done differently. And our first concern is, like a concerns-based model. How is this going to impact on me? That's the first thing that we worry about, that teachers worry about. So attending to that as new principles is very important.
It's really important because how the leader sets the tone has an impact on our well-being at work and the way they engage with us. We're not talking about something that's ethereal here. It's real and it's lived and it impacts our health and well-being. So it's super important. And I guess that's what I just wanted to emphasize. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Sorry about that. But
no, not at all. And I think when we think about a continuum of a level of influence, if we can visualize that, if we have leadership on one end and student learning, if you want to, on the next, we know through our study of leadership influence already that leadership is, of all school factors, leadership is second to that. We've got teachers who are the closest one in that kind of visualization, and then comes leadership. But it's just, first of all, just because it's the second, it doesn't mean it's just as important or significant. It's very significant. It's very important. Previous research, has told us and convinced us that it's even more important in schools that need it the most. So in disadvantaged contexts and so forth, or in challenging contexts. So if we have new principles coming in, if the impact or if the influence of having a new leader is having that response on teachers' well-being, as I showed, whether it's positive or negative, on teachers' sense of belonging, on teachers' professional development and capacity building, and even if it's a little bit less on the relationship between teachers themselves and teacher and students, it would seem natural that then it would have an impact on what they're going to do in the classroom. So if we continue that influence, we want teachers who feel supported by their principals. And that support, as I said, it doesn't have to be one-on-one. Most of the time it isn't, unless you're in a very, very small school. But there's that sense of, I have this structures around me or resources to support me that really have been initiated by the leadership. And so that is important. We need that so that teachers can continue to do the wonderful job they do in the classrooms as well.
I'm also really taken with your thoughts about the visibility and taking that time, taking that 20 minutes, to make sure that you're connected or you're seen and that you're connecting with students and you're connecting with staff, but you're there, you're the walking person on the ground that people see the leader is here, And I was thinking about it subsequently. I remember when you spoke about this before, it's just stayed in my mind. And leaders who are introverts, and I'm one of them, it can be quite a challenge to build that in yourself, to build that comfort. But when I heard you talk about it before, I came away saying that's just gold, really. And something that you might think I'll take for granted or just do for a little bit and then not continue. But the consistency of that visibility, probably we can't overestimate the value of it. And I've heard other people respond to you saying that so positively and say that's something they want to embed in their own practice as leaders.
Definitely. And look, if there's anything that I teach, in the Master of Leadership now, and when I'm teaching now what I know, and it's fascinating being the lecturer now in a master's where I was a student. 10 years ago. And I reflect on that a lot because I learn every day when I do it, and I'm really excited about it. But what, of course, and one of the things we do is talk about how did we get to school leadership here, and we sort of do a historical approach and look at all that. But I think in the last 100 years or so, one of the best things that we've really come to understand about leadership, and not just in schools but in general, is that you're not born with that.
Mm-hmm.
Leaders are not born. That we can become leaders. We can train, and particularly in school leadership, we must request that our development as leaders is part of being a leader.
Yeah.
So, and I think I might have said that towards the end in the webinar, or maybe in the Twitter chat, I can't remember, but something like, when you're going for a leadership role, when you're new, you've been appointed, ask those that have appointed you, how are you going to be supported? What will you need? And maybe for some people, it might be, a bit more help with perhaps that visibility. Some people might understand that it's important, but might not necessarily come natural to them. And that's fine. And that's okay. So we want that. We want to be able to continue learning. We want to be able to develop more, in our leadership practices. We want principals to do that. And sometimes we have to make sure, on the one hand, that, again, those responsible, those supporting that leader, so school board, I'm not quite sure how in Ireland the construction of that governance is, but whoever it is in that group that's supporting your principals, they need to be aware of that. And we also, I think, need to build confidence in our future school leaders and our new principals at the moment by getting them to have the confidence to say, okay, this is what I need now. I know what the school needs. I know what I need to do. But I also need support, and I need it in this area.
And also being able to reflect enough to know the area that you want to work on. So, because, whether it's managing meetings, whether it's time management, whether it's, prioritization of projects, or, some principals. I was talking to a colleague yesterday who was a retired principal, amazing woman, but she was talking about, and I was doing the building, like building the building, so they're called on to do these roles that are way beyond what a leader may be asked to do in a different area. With amazing skill, they do it, but it's about being able to say, okay, I need some professional development on that, and it should be available to me, and how to get it.
And it should be part of the role. So sometimes that is explicit, and it's in the contract, and it's in writing, and that's great. Coaching is a wonderful thing. There's mentoring, the resources we have of past principals, retired principals, the wealth of knowledge and expertise that those individuals have is something we need to continue to use because that's very important. That's very, very important. So it's, we have to make sure that they have those structures. But sometimes it's not explicit. Sometimes it might just be in passing, or sometimes it's just not talked about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Something that interests me about it, about the idea of a new principal coming in and, kind of putting themselves into the mold that's already there, is I know we've spoken to past guests on the podcast about, really being yourself and having that integrity and making sure that what you do on a day-to-day basis aligns with your values. And the I suppose balance, I'll call it, of trying to build on what's already there, but then make sure that you're staying true to your own values and your own beliefs. And it's not to say one person is ever right and one person is totally wrong, but we do at the end of the day all have slightly different values at least. So that, that complicated space of juggling those two things.
Absolutely. And I think, Niamh, what you've just said has huge implications on how we prepare our future leaders. And the two of you are at the heart of that, doing a great job. We have to start these conversations early, and in fact, earlier than ever, perhaps, that we have to make sure that they are understanding how leadership works, that they understand, that we can support them if that's something that they're interested in pursuing, and developing that identity as well.
I think sometimes people don't see that they have the capacity to be the leader until somebody says to them, have you thought about this? Because I think you could be really good at it. And then they just almost like open up and think, wow. And they just need that. It's not a tap on the shoulder with nepotism to say you're the next person. It's just being able to say to people, several people in the team, wow, I think you've got something. Have you thought about doing that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes on our program, we have one or two maybe at the end who'll say, I don't want to do it, which is also to me a very good outcome, because they've taken all of the skills and will use that in their leadership, in their teaching work. But they know, having been out there, that it's not for them. And that's as good an outcome as also deciding it is for you and taking time to build a skill.
I think you've mentioned something very, very important, and that also comes back to identifying talent, established principles, even new principles very early on. Need to start thinking what's going to be the next leadership. Doesn't mean they have to think about their own replacement, but in the process of building capacity, which is building that capacity not just for the classroom, but building capacity for the betterment of the whole organization. Absolutely. So sharing that leadership, building leadership possibilities, creating a more flat, perhaps shared leadership model where teachers can test that, try that, have that possibility of being that middle, what we call middle leadership roles, is about then being able to identify that talent that you were saying, Patricia, and also developing your own. If we're going to talk about the importance of the fit, being the right fit, I'm not saying that every new principal has to be appointed from within the school, but a lot of the time it might be exactly what the school needs. And that comes with becoming a principal after having been the vice principal, perhaps even more challenging from an identity development process. But, we must commit as school leaders to developing. I mean, we're in a very altruistic profession here. Let's be proud of that, why not continue with that up to a certain extent if that's what it takes.
It's very exciting to plant the seed and watch it grow in colleagues too. To say, I think, have you thought about doing some development in leadership? You have huge potential, and just watching the excitement. And often it's met with, no, I couldn't possibly. And then after some thought, coming back into it and saying, okay, I'll have a look. And what an amazing place to be in, to be able to do that with people. I think it's the gift we give back to the profession. It's really important. Definitely.
And I think in particular, we have to be mindful of women in educational leadership, because around the world, we still have quite a large feminine teaching profession, but not necessarily that's the case in school leadership. And so, the wonderful work that a lot of people are doing around the world to see, well, what's happening there, and how can we improve that?
There's the piece around ensuring the visibility of women in leadership in education and supporting women to see their potential to do that. But there's also a piece of work in looking at what happens to women when they're in that role at the moment and how we support them. Because there are still, unfortunately, some experiences of misogyny that we also need to work on to be able to support women.
Absolutely. And look, that has to do with a number of things. On the one hand, it has to do with how women are supported in leadership. For example, within the role. And unfortunately, we have to say things that we wish weren't like that. But the reality is that women are the people in a household where you have children, for example. If there are two adults, they tend to be the ones that are going to be more occupied with things like that. So we can't kid ourselves and say, just think about your work balance. Well, it's harder than it is for men. We can't deny it. So what are we doing to do that? Why is it that a leadership role in schools can only be a full-time job? Can it be shared? I'm not saying one or the other, but we have to think outside the box. We really have to think in a lateral way and say, is it really an area so we can actually have outstanding women leading our schools? Well, if that's what it's going to take, then we need to do it and we need to address it. And even things sometimes like thinking that, in a more conservative way, and thinking that leadership, you have to be bold, you have to be confident, and somehow associate those things with men leading rather than women leading. So we have to break all these stereotypes, which we are doing, but and more, I think we see women leading schools. We see here in Australia lately women leading boys-only schools, which is something that we wouldn't have seen a while back. But we still need to do that. And so our university, our graduate school of education, we're going to try and tackle that as well in our teacher initiation courses, in teacher education courses. We've just introduced in our new program a core subject on leadership in schools. So we want it's an intervention really about getting our first years, our students who are coming in to become teachers very early on to become aware and should do what's the influence and the impact that leadership has on school improvement and school effectiveness.
But they're the leaders of the future. That's the point. So we should be doing that quite early.
I think it's really valuable because, like, inevitably people that do initial teacher training go into leadership roles. So you have, the principal and the deputy principal. Then when you take into account middle leaders as well, it's quite a considerable amount of teachers that will end up in leadership positions. So I think it's brilliant to bring in a course that shows that awareness from the very, very beginning, to get people thinking about that and to get people in tuned with school leadership, because a lot of them will find themselves in that position. Yeah.
Even if teachers, like the case of your student, Patricia, you were saying, that decided that leadership was not for them, that's okay, but it's important for that. It's important that they know what to expect.
Yeah, I think we should be talking more about leadership across the range of educational activity and not just in the leadership space, if I'm making any sense to you. That it's not just for when I'm doing a course on leadership, it's actually from when I'm in education and from when I begin. We plant the seed about how we sustain the profession.
I also think it's important for principals to know that teachers have high expectations of leadership. Mm-hmm, so we need to teach our teachers. We need to build their understanding of what good leadership looks like, and expect that.
Absolutely, yeah.
And we also need to work with teachers to be realistic about their leaders being human beings and not able to do everything. There's almost two pieces to that for me that I'm interested in.
There's a lot that teachers can do as well to prepare for when a new principal comes. So it's not really all about what does the new principal need to do, what does the school have to do. Teachers have also responsibilities. They also have to, as you say, they have to give the new principal a go. You can't be judgmental straight away and say this is not going to work because the previous one was so outstanding. So preparing teachers for the transition is important. I don't think it's all one side, and it's not just about what the new principal can do as they come in. I think particularly in the transition process, so that is exactly just when the new principal has been announced, everyone knows who it is. It's usually the rest of the leadership team, deputy principals, vice principals, who can play a really important role there in being very clear and communicating who this new person is that's coming in. And teachers, it's a way of saying they need to do their homework. They have to first of all, find out more about this person. Sometimes the school may provide some information about what they have done in the past, where they've led before, what some of the achievements they've had. But also it's good to remind teachers that, a new principal is also going to be going through a whole lot of challenges, a new place for them, new staff, new expectations, high expectations, and they are going to be developing their leadership identity. And so it's important to allow them to be able to show who they are as the person, what their values are. We need principals to have the opportunity to articulate what their values are, because they will really drive what they do as leaders. So I think there's a lot that teachers can do there as well.
Absolutely.
So it's very much about starting where people are at and being okay in that space, and then working it out, I think, to make it optimal for the school, for the teachers and for the principal, who are all just human beings trying to do good work, make a better space together. And that's the important piece of that.
That's right.
So what's next for you, Berni, in terms of research? What are you going to look at next? Because we're fascinated with your work, so dying to hear what's next on the horizon.
Oh, there's so many things I have to learn, and there are so many areas that I'm interested in. But certainly, I'm interested in this developing trust in high principal turnover contexts. So that's kind of like a subset within my thesis. So I'm going to give that paper in September and hopefully publish that paper. I'm also very interested in that gap that I found as well in my research, where there's so much positive recognition of new principals who put an emphasis on building capacity of teachers, and yet the teachers didn't perceive that was really having any impact on their classroom practice. So I'm interested to see why that gap still exists, and what else could leadership do to enact that, so to help with that. I don't know, anything to do with school leadership I'm really passionate about. I'd love to collaborate with more people, really interested as a global learner as well, to do, what's happening here, not just in Australia, but what are the commonalities that we can share and learn from other places. There's still a lot to do. Leadership is still very important.
I think this is a conversation to be continued, so hopefully you'll come back and talk to us again. I think there are a lot of commonalities. I think your work speaks very well to the Irish context, and we've experienced that recently. So to be continued would be my view on this one.
That would be wonderful. I look forward to it. Maybe I'll come and visit you next time. We can do it face to face.
Would love it. You'd be extremely welcome. So just let us know when the ticket is being booked. So so we might wrap it up for now. Berni, thank you so much for coming across the world remotely to talk to us this morning. We really appreciate it, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks million, Berni. It's always a pleasure, and
it's a pleasure. I really enjoy speaking with you both.
Absolutely, and there's always so much to learn from you. So thank you for your conversations, and hopefully we'll chat to you soon.
It's mutual. I learned from you as well. Thank you so much for having me.